Hello, and welcome to Church Lady, the cries of a desperate woman, the talk show. I'm Lorraine Jones, and I will be your commentary. Um, today's topic, to get right into it, today's topic is based on a familiar uh, story in Scripture. It is found in Matthew 9:20 ninth chapter, 20th through the 24th verse. That's Matthew ninth chapter, 20th through the 24th verse. And this familiar story is of the woman with the issue of blood. Um, Now, I can identify with this desperate woman because when I look at our Black society, our Black families, our Black communities, our Black churches, and our children, I can see clearly we have an issue. Now, you can read the scripture. I'm not going to go into reading the scripture for you. You can read that in your own time. What I'd like to spend these few minutes um, talking about is I'd like to start by sharing an analysis today. And then I want to go on and stress just 3 points. So before we get into those points, uh, let me share a breakdown that I've done, comparison in a comparison analysis in just a few of the words used in this story. Um, when you read this story, I want you to imagine three things. I want you to imagine that the woman is like the Black family. The woman is like the Black community and the Black church. The blood in this story is like our children, which are our future. They're essential um, to our livelihood in the future. They are the most valuable players of our sustainability. And the fact that they cannot read is a problem. I'll say that again. The fact that our children, our future, our VIPs cannot read is a problem. The issue, which is the final term I want you to imagine, that's like the systemic institutionalized racism structure that is within our educational system here in America that does not allow our children to learn to read. And I want to get into the 3 points. So we've got, just to reiterate, we've got the woman, which is like the Black family, the Black church, the Black community. We've got the issue, which is like our children, which are our future, that cannot read. And the blood, the blood is like our children that cannot read. And the issue is systemic institutionalized racism that it is in place and not allowing our children to learn how to read. And as we go on in the story, and as you take time to read this story and just imagine replacing the woman, the blood, and the issue with our youth for the blood, and us for the woman, and replacing the issue for systemic institutionalized racism, and the fact that that is what is not allowing our children to learn how to read in this educational system of America. Whew. And now I want to go on and just make my 3 points for today before I let you go. We're not taking long at all. And so the first point that I want to make is, in reading this story, you will find that the woman was desperate. She was desperate to be healed. She was not trying to learn how to accept her condition. She was looking for a change. She was looking for a solution. She was looking for a remedy to her issue. She was not satisfied. And according to the story, we see that she spent all of her resources going from one doctor to another doctor to another doctor, trying to get the healing that she sought, trying to get the solution to her problem, and trusting that this time, this doctor would be able to render that. But after all her resources was spent, she still had the same problem. She still was in need of healing. And I gotta tell you, when it comes to the fact that our children cannot read, I can really identify with this woman because I've attended school district meetings and workshops, state conferences, school board meetings and sessions. I've met with teachers, principals, superintendents, school HR directors. I've served on various committees, both locally and district-wide. And after all of that, the problem still continues. Our children still cannot read. And that is because systemic institutionalized racism will not allow them the opportunity to. So I want you to think on that. After all of the efforts that we've put in, our children still can't read. That's my first point. And that is because of systemic institutionalized racism, not all the other stuff about poverty. I'm sure that that has a part, but that's not the reason that we cannot get a resolution to this problem, to this issue, if you will. So let's move on to the next point. This woman had an issue. She had a problem. And I want to clearly identify this for you, why I feel systemic institutionalized racism is that problem. Let me show you. Some people just love to have the data. So let me give you something to hang your hat on. In 1968, the federal government began a 10-year, billion-dollar project called Project Follow Through. And this was deemed for our at-risk children who could not read from grades K to 3, which, as many of you know, these are the grades that our children learn to read. Now, in 1968, I was 7 years old. I didn't even know there was such a number as a billion. I was familiar with $1 million, but $1 billion, I didn't even know there was that much money in the world. But here it was in 1967 on a federal level. They put together a project that would last 10 years just to study and find a solution to at-risk children learning how to read. And then in 1997, oh, before I even go any further, let me just point out that from K to 3, our children are learning how to read. From the 4th grade onward, they're reading to learn. So the negative impact that this has and why it's so important is if our children cannot read, they cannot learn. They won't be able to comprehend. They won't be able to understand what's being taught from the 4th grade on. That's an issue. That's a problem. And that's why it's so important that our children learn how to read from K, actually before they even enter the system. There are some things that they need to know, that we are responsible and accountable to them knowing when they enter the system. And as we know, many of us, our children enter the system already behind. That's a problem. And then the systemic racism that's in place within that system further impacts our children's inability to learn how to read by the 3rd grade, which negatively impacts their future. In 1977, after ignoring Project Follow Through, the results that it rendered, they ignored it after spending $1 billion. After tracking it for 10 years, they ignored it for 20 years. $1 billion investment, 10 years in time, all lost for the next 20 years. In 1997, after ignoring this project for 20 years, Congress, again, on the federal level, Congress had pulled together a panel, and their instructions were to evaluate, once again, to find the best way to teach our at-risk children how to read. Even though this information had been available since the 70s, which is, over 20 years, here we go again. Let's take a look and see how we can help at-risk kids learn how to read. Repeating dead words. And then in 2017, we're not talking about that long ago now. This has been going on for a long time. In 2017, the law requiring that the school system be held accountable was repealed. Let me say that again, because we need to get it. In 2017, recent years, the federal government repealed the law that was in place requiring that school systems be held accountable for teaching our children how to read. Let me tell you why that is significant to point number 2. But before I do, I want to tell you I want to clearly define repeal. Repeal means to revoke or rescind. To repeal a law is to void an existing law. And that was done on a federal level. That's systemic institutionalized racism. And that's the issue that we face today due to our kids, our future. That's our blood. And what I'm saying is that our blood, our future, is what's at risk. Here is one more point that I want to make for point number 2. They repealed the law that said that they were responsible. They did that in 2017, but before they did that, and probably to explain why they even did that, there was a group of Michigan parents in July of 2012. Yes, that was a few years before they did it. These parents, they filed a lawsuit against the public schools in their district for failing to teach their children how to read, which by law at that time, they were required to do. So then in 2017, they took that law back. They said, oh no, not going to require them. So now you can't sue because they've taken the law back that said you could, or gave you a basis to. And so I want you to think about that as I move on to my final point, point 3. This woman in this story, she had this issue. She had this problem for a long time. Our systemic racist educational system here in America has tracked our kids not being able to read since 1968 until present time, with no plans to implement, to show that they've implemented, to heal this issue, our issue. It's been 54 years, people of God. Is there not a cause? After millions of our children, our future, have gone through the system, millions, not being able to read proficiently, having a negative impact on their lives, on their futures, on their communities, on their families. Millions. You think about it. And then let me see. So we covered all of that. So what I want to say, just to recap, that the first point that I want you to marinate on is that this desperate woman was desperate for change. When we think about the future of Black America, of the Black church, of the Black family, of our children's future being impacted negatively because of their inability to access better due to not being able to read. When we think about this, I don't know about you, but it makes me desperate for change. I don't want to learn how to live with such a desperate and future for our children. I don't want to learn how to live. I don't want to accept that. I want to fight against it. This woman, she fought with all of her resources against her issue. And this is definitely an issue, people of God. We've got to not accept change, but to prepare ourselves to fight for better, for change, for resolution, for healing. And point number 2 is that she had an issue. We've got to understand that our children not being able to read for over 50 years, they've gone through the educational system and it has impacted their lives negatively for over 50 years. That's a problem. That's an issue. And it's our issue. And it's negatively impacting our children and our lives. Millions of children have been victimized through this system. And it's been going on for a very long time, too long. And that is point number 3. So let that marinate, people of God. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you next week when we will get into part 2.